Hello, everyone. Welcome to our session for today. And I hope you guys are doing okay. For any questions related to the previous discussions that we've had, you're always welcome to let me know. All right. How is everyone doing these days? I hope you're able to cope and manage with all the things that you have been doing and you need to do in the coming days. All right, I'm going to share with you my screen and today we're going to talk about a very important topic which will prepare you for the next important activity in the class. All right, and this is about academic writing. Okay, so I'll start from the very beginning. Now, in the past, we have been talking about corporate communication, and I suppose you guys are already well versed when it comes to corporate communication. If not well versed, maybe the expression is you're very much exposed to it and confident enough that in the future or in the coming days, you'll be able to communicate using corporate language, corporate format, etc. Right? Along those lines, we're not setting aside corporate communication, but along those lines, we also need to concentrate on academic writing. Why is that? Because academic writing is part of the life of a student, right? And in the university, you will be required to write a lot of academic papers, and they are academic in nature. Therefore, as part of this course, I would like to highlight, right? I would like to highlight um, how is it for a college students? How do you write an academic paper? You covered this in research writing and maybe partly in your reading and writing classes, but this course also would require something that would demonstrate your academic writing skills. Therefore, I believe that I should somehow provide you some lecture. To some of you, it might be a review, but nonetheless, let's go through this and let's learn how much, as much as we can. Now, um, you and I are engaged in academic writing. Even when we're done with our, education, you would encounter, okay, tasks like this, maybe at workplace. So let's learn as much as we can. Okay. Now, let's begin by identifying our audiences. When we write an academic paper, the first top is to consider who our audiences are or who is our audience. In your case, as students, your audience, of course, is composed of educators or maybe your teacher. Okay, that's your audience. Another possible audience is that when you're asked to write something, maybe you will need to share it with your classmates as well, especially if you need to present it. If the teacher says, okay, you're going to present it to class, then your audiences are composed not just of the educators, but also your classmates. Now, in terms of educators, what do? You will be required to synthesize something, some content, and then you're going to submit that. Or you might want to um, disseminate that or publish that elsewhere. That's the same. All right. That's basically the same. Or if you're dealing with um, if you're dealing with your audiences are the educators, sometimes you just don't synthesize your content. You also are doing that to persuade or convince. What do we mean by that? In your content, you're not just discussing, you're not just explaining, you are also trying to persuade me as your teacher that your content is a good one, it's worth pursuing, and it's worth publishing, and it's worth a high grade. That's part of the persuading there. Or just the arguments are so compelling that I am persuaded, okay, with the arguments. That's what we mean by the persuasion aspect there. Okay, what about classmates? Your classmates mostly, maybe, okay, when you do your research, you just want to synthesize so that you can share with them. Although it's also possible that when you prepare a research, write the research, it's also intended to somehow persuade your classmates or convince them to believe certain arguments that you are um, suggesting to them. Now let's move on. So we have educators in terms of our audience and students. And then what about genre? This kind of writing is expository. Now you learn that as well in senior high school. Expository is you have main points, of course, and then you describe those, explain those. You have a main point, you have supporting arguments, and you probably have illustration like data or figures, findings, etc. And for the most part, when we talk about research, they are persuasive. Meaning to say, when you're conducting a research, there's always something new that you are trying to present. And that something new should be seen by other people that indeed it is new and it's important and it must be, submitted as a research or as a journal article. Right. So let's move on. Now, there are types of academic writing, and you are probably familiar with this. So let's begin with number one. Number one is essays. You know what essays are. You just discuss a particular topic, or you're given a particular topic and you develop that. That's an essay. Okay. Some of you are familiar with reflection papers. That might be an example of essay. So you're asked a question, for example, how is your discourse competence? Then you talk about that. As far as I know, probably you say, I am capable of writing a good article and I am capable of um, expressing myself in front of an audience. Therefore, I would say I have discourse competence. And then you develop each part, like the oral competence and the written competence there. You have a main topic, you have supporting arguments, and then illustration. You learn that in your research writing and reading and writing. So here I'm just giving you a brief review. The next one is doing lab reports for your science courses, for example, biology, zoology, and related subjects. Now, what's the difference? In lab reports, you tend to be more technical, and the language, of course, is technical because it's scientific, it's science, etc. So you're more formal, if I may. In some essays, sometimes you can be a little informal. Okay, the emphasis there is to be able to put things together from your main point to the supporting points to the illustration, and then how to arrange your thoughts from introduction, body, and conclusion. You also do that in lab reports, but the content, of course, is different. What about academic papers? Academic papers consist of course, research papers. They may be long or short. Short theses for high school, college, and master's level students, and then dissertations for graduate PhD students. So that's what we need to expect there. All right. So speaking of research, when you do research, this is your task. Your task is you investigate. You are an investigator. Okay? What do you investigate? Well, practically, you want to look for certain facts or some data, and then you put them together. Okay? It's like going to the market, going to the groceries. Your mom or your dad or your family told you you're going to cook. Okay? And you're going to cook adobo. But you don't know really what adobo is. Maybe you have a slight idea. So you probably have to start asking, Mom, what are the ingredients? That's part of the investigation, right? And your mom would give you, okay, here are the ingredients. If it's chicken pork adobo, then it's going to be chicken and pork, right? And then what are the other ingredients? What are the condiments that are needed? What how do I begin with, how do I even do the cooking? So those are part of your investigation, gathering of facts. And then once you have gathered the facts or data, you put them together. That means after you have gathered the facts about, for example, cooking adobo, chicken pork adobo, it's now up to you to not just write them down, but actually actualize what you have gathered. You are now going to buy the material, the ingredients, okay, the condiments, and then follow the instructions and you cook. So in research writing, you do that. There's a beginning, there's an end. You look for the facts and put them together, you synthesize them, and whatever you have written, that's your finished product. But there are procedures to follow, right? So that would be your synthesis. Okay, there are two aspects of your investigation because you are a researcher. First, you begin with background information or background investigation. What do we mean by this? You're familiar with review of related literature. That's what we mean by background information or background investigation. Before you can even um, investigate something, you need to know about the background. Go back to our illustration. How can you cook chicken pork adobo? You don't have a background. So to know how to cook it, you have to investigate, do some initial investigation. So probably you go online or you ask your loved ones and they give you some facts about it. That's part of it. So you read about it. That's the background investigation. And that's your review of related literature. Why is that? Why is that important? Because you will not really have a total grasp or understanding of the research that you're going to do without that background. You need to understand it. It's like you want to go to a particular place. You want to go to Taipei, Taiwan, for example. Normally, you would read up something about Taiwan, the places where you need to go to. You don't just go to the airport, you just don't buy your ticket and go to the airport and fly all the way to Taiwan. No, you ask people, you read up about Taiwan and good places to go to for shopping, for milk tea, for food, etc., places to visit. That's part of your review of related literature. Once you are already traveling, trying to go around and enjoy, that's no longer the background investigation. That's more than just review of related literature. We're doing now the actual trip. We're doing the actual cooking, or that's the actual investigation, right? So this actual investigation, let me move this. This actual investigation is now your actual conduct of study. This is now your experiment, your investigation, where you get to discuss your findings and compare it with what you have read. Is it true? For example, just an example. So you learn that in Taiwan, it's good to visit night markets. Then that's your background review of related literature, that there's a good probably night market in Shilin or in some other districts of Taiwan, and you visit them. Okay, so that's the background, that's the review. And then once you are there, that's your actual investigation. You'll get to see, oh, so now this is Shilin market. So now this is this particular night market. That's part of your investigation now. And then compare. In my readings, they said the food here is this, but in my actual trip, in my actual visit, it's quite different. That's what you do in your research. You discuss whatever findings you have in consideration as well. You try to compare it with the previous readings that you have, the background that you have about the research. Okay, you want more? Okay, let's do this. How do you write, by the way, the literature review? Sometimes you don't need, just like in my paper, you don't need to write, to use the exact term literature review. I'll be able to see it, okay? Find it in your writing. where you are discussing a little bit about, a background about your topic. But you should have a title that shows me and you that you are actually talking about the background of your study. So your guide in writing your literature review is actually, it begins with this. What is the research problem or topic? In other words, what is it that you're trying to investigate? Okay. For example, your topic is communication strategies as reflected in the movie Joy. So you want to focus on what Joy did, okay, in order for her, sorry, to accomplish what she was able to accomplish or enabled it in order to succeed. What did she do basically from the beginning all the way to the end? So let's say that's what you want to find out. So what do you need to do? You begin with number two, what are the variables? Okay, you're familiar with this, but let me explain again. Variables are, they can be people, they can be places, they can be things, or any phenomena that you would want to measure. In this case, what are the phenomena? What are the variables that we would want to identify and study and measure? We are measuring, remember? We're trying to look for descriptions. What are these? Where did they occur? And how long and how many, etc. Okay, so let's take a look at some more examples. Let's say, as I said, we're looking at communication strategies in Joy, right? So you know that the variables there are these. You begin with communication. So communication is in general is a variable or communication strategies in general. By the way, we're not yet talking here about the movie itself. You are not yet investigating. We are talking about here, we are talking of communication in general. Okay? And then communication strategies. We are not talking of Joy here yet because our goal is to have a background, and that background is what? It's review of related literature. So what is expected in review of related literature? You're not going to discuss your topic yet. You're going to discuss the background of your topic. Since your topic is about communication, you're going to talk about communication. And since you are also focusing on strategies in communication, after defining or describing communication, you will have to move on to some communication strategies, and in this particular case, business communication strategies. Number two, another variable background is that you will need to talk about movies because you're getting your ideas, you're getting your facts or data from a movie. And in particular, you will need to provide a background, not the content yet. Why? Because you are going to actually peruse, investigate you know, the content, but you can talk about the plot. Okay? You can talk about the plot, who are the characters, etc. When it was produced and how much money it earned, who are the actors, the actresses, etc. But you don't talk about the strategies. Why? Because those strategies will be discussed in the actual paper, in the actual research. So our preliminary work, if you remember, right, at the beginning of the semester, we talked about communication models like the SMCR model by Berlo. But we have learned that in communication, that's not enough. That's just initial. We can use it, but it's not complete because there are also other things to consider. And so when you talk about communication, probably you can start with a model that you would want, like, okay, one communication model is that of Berlo, because again, you're talking about communication, right? And then don't be happy with that. You have to expound on what communication is by adding other models, which we also covered in this class, right? I've given you the textbook and the reading assignments on Chambers, for example. So we talked about the communication realities. We had a lecture on this, the filters, the weaknesses, and the specs that we discussed. All right, in or we will be discussing, by the way. in effective communication, right? So, and you have been able to read those. And then you might want to talk about Harrington as well, like the feedback loop that we talked about. That's an implied model, right? And you might want to include, since you're talking about communication, you might want to talk about persuasive spoken communication. All right. So again, that's just the beginning of your literature review because your topic is about communication. Then you have to discuss communication and possibly communication models. That's my recommendation. Okay. Now, um, you might want to include, for example, verbal and nonverbal aspects of communication, which is not or which are not concern of Berlo, but because it's linear flow. So that's a suggestion. For example, you can include Harrington and Lewis, who point to communication in a business context. So it's very specific. So you are now narrowing down your focus to something that is specific, like business. Why business? Because you are going to discuss Joy's business communication strategies. So it relates. That's why it's called review of related literature. Then you might want to also talk about success in the workplace. Like you will probably include, um, some claims that 15% of what we do in the actual, in the corporate world, 15% is needed. 15% is technical, what we know, what we bring in, our training, etc. And the rest of it has to do with people skills. That means how you deal with and communicate to people, right? So after discussing this, you are now going to add, so what? What are the implications of this? That's part of the discussion in your review of related literature. Now, you also, if you talk about Harrington and Lewis, you can probably talk about the important role of the sender in spoken business communication, for example. That's still part of your review of related literature. You can talk about the qualification of the speaker, such as the need for preparation and training, and then compare it with what Berlo's saying. How you connect it with Berlo. Again, we're talking about communication here because your topic is communication strategies in the business context, as seen in Joy, the movie. And you would want to talk about the qualities or characteristics of the message to send. We also learned that from Berlo. We learned it from other um, writers or experts. Now, communication is not linear. We learned this, no? We learn it. As you know, Berlo proposed it to be linear, but that's not the case. According to Harrington and Lewis, it's a transactional model. Okay, um, it they are basically there's the sending of the message, but it doesn't end there. According to Harrington and Lewis, there are some other elements like there's a feedback after decoding the message. The decoder would also like to send feedback and they become an encoder or sender as well. So what's the point? We see here the significance of both the decoding, the receiving of the message, and also your desire as a decoder to also speak or encode by the receiver. In other words, it's active. So that's what you need to discuss there. What they are saying, not what you know or understand. So what did we learn from Chambers? We learned that communication is king. So you might want to include that as well in your discussion, that communication is transactional. Okay, it doesn't end. It keeps on going and going and going, etc. So the bottom line here is that the sender and the message are critical, but it doesn't end there. So that's what you might want to talk about in your literature review, and you probably enhance Berlo by adding feedback because again, communication is transactional. So we learned that in Harrington and Lewis's elements of communication, there's feedback, there is noise. Okay, these are barriers. Okay, filters. This can be internal, meaning something that you feel. Maybe you're sick, you have some emotions going on, or external, like actual noise, somebody's banging the door, your neighbor's noisy, etc. So you might want to add as well what Chambers mean by noise, because he also talks about noise as well. So now you have an extensive background about communication and communication models. You are presenting a linear model and transactional model. So somehow you provided a good background there that will prepare you in writing your paper and in conducting first and foremost your actual research, because you're now going to focus on, for example, uh, the movie Joy and what did she really do there that demonstrate communication strategies in business. Okay. Now let's add, you might want to add in your readings, you found this, that directions of communication in the corporate setting vary. One would include downward communication, and you know that. You remember your activities in your companies, right? So it's communication coming from the managers or from the top to the employees, okay? Like a memo from the boss. Upward communication, it's a communication coming from the employees going up to the CEO or to the manager. And so you might want to talk about this as well. And by the way, when you talk about background information and literature review, you can copy the actual terms, but the descriptions, the explanations, they have to be paraphrased coming from you. And you put the necessary citations, okay? Citation after your direct quotes and after your paraphrasing. Okay. The next one is lateral, meaning to say this is same level communication. You are rank and file and you are communicating to the same person. It's rank and file. That's lateral. And number four, you might want to talk about this as well, include it in your discussion, that there are some communicative activities in the corporate world that they just happen, like they are unplanned, like you're being interviewed by a TV reporter, for example, or news reporter. Then you can talk about that in the literature review. So what we covered forms part of our review about communication. That's our literature review. That's what you need to do in a research paper. You cannot proceed without understanding the background of your topic. What if your topic is about, you would want to know if the maxims of Grice are being, observed, whether or not they're being observed in a particular situation, like in a particular company. So what are you going to do? Same thing. You're going to study the four maxims of H.P. Grice. You would want to know about H.P. Grice, and you would want to understand what cooperative principle is, and you would expound on the four um, maxims, and you would give examples there. That is your literature review. Are you with me? Okay, so if you pursue a literature review, for example, on communication, because this is your topic, you may be guided by the following questions. Okay, so these are just suggestions, assuming that your topic is about communication. Of course, it's not. So question is, what do other communication experts say about communication in general? In other words, you cannot have a literature review by just talking about one person. That's not a review, okay? So a review means review. There are so many to cover, not just one, many, okay? So probably 5 to 10 or even more, depending on what will, provide you substantial information and depending on what your teacher suggests. Number two, what are the other models of communication? Again, you're talking about communication, so it's important that you talk about models. Okay, discuss how they support or enhance or contradict Berlo, because we started with Berlo. That's what you know, and it's not enough. No, there are so many: Chambers, Harrington, and Lewis, and many others who are communication experts. Chambers and Harrington and Lewis, they are coming from the business context. But there are other experts who are coming from the same expertise field and others from communication and from language. So you can cite them. Number three, what else can you, what would be your guide? After you took some notes, what's your responsibility? You paraphrase. You do not copy exactly what is in your note, in your notebook. Okay, paraphrase the gathered information. You have to use your own words, different structure, different terminology, different flow of information. And do not forget your APA citations and your reference base, of course. Now, you can divide your review into sub-themes. You should, because it's going to be very long, all right? Or subtopics. No limit on the number of headings, okay, and number of paragraphs. You just observe, you just have to remember that here you are required to present a 3 to 5 pages of research paper. Now, if you want to go beyond 5, that's okay, so long as that's substantial. So you need to consult sample literature reviews here. Um, that will give you an idea. So the culmination of this writing, okay, of this uh, review of related literature is actually your quantitative or qualitative paper. In this paper, we're doing qualitative, meaning it's what you observe, it's what you see. You're not going to interview, you're not going to um, send a survey form. No, there's already a text or material that you're going to evaluate using a particular framework. Grice, um, who else? Politeness theories, Delheim, you might want to talk about the speaking model or the 4 competences under communicative competence, etc. So you combine now your literature review with your investigation on communication because your topic is communication, right? Um, with the communication problem or phenomenon, that makes your study complete. That is now your research paper. You begin with a review of the topic, and then you use the framework that is contained in your review of related literature. You use that as your magnifying glass, as your lenses or lens, okay, to determine if indeed these are being shown or being used in that particular context. All right, that would be your paper. Now, suppose you want to pursue a topic on communication models or communication process. So again, you would want to explore probably Berlow. You begin with Berlow and then Chambers and then Harrington and Lewis. And these are just, by the way, incidental. You can begin with any that you want, okay? But we're using some examples because you are familiar with them. Or if you just want to use something from Berlow in Berlow, you might probably just want to use just the sender aspect there. Okay. Remember, you have already discussed all these topics. Okay. But then in your particular paper, you were just focusing on the sender. We did that in our evaluation of Steve Jobs, right? We just focus on the sender and message. But you can do all 4. You can focus on sender, message, channel, or receiver. All 4. You can also do that. Or what about in chambers? You might want to focus on the filters, the weaknesses in corporate communication, both of them, or just one. That's what you're going to find out or investigate in a particular situation or context. What about in Harrington and Lewis? Let's say you reviewed about Harrington and Lewis. You can focus on any of these, like what, how is the use of nonverbal communication in a particular company or in this particular context in school among students? It's up to you. Or what constitutes good communication in that particular company, etc. Or what are the examples of poor communication in company X. So you're going to investigate and you're going to use the standards or the ideas of Harrington and Lewis there, or the directions of communication in corporate context. Let's say you're going to investigate company X. Do they have lateral communication? Do they have top down, okay, from top or under? And then do they have incidental communication? All those you can probably investigate. You can use any of these as your framework. We're talking about framework here. And the results of your investigation, you discuss them, you combine them with your literature review, and then you give conclusion, and that is your paper. All right, that's all. Happy researching and writing. If you have any questions, you let me know.